The Lonely Libertine. Written by Johnny Fist. We'll call the hero of this story Philip, so that listeners won't draw parallels with anyone they know. He was a man of neither great beauty nor unfortunate appearance. Tall, well-built, yet very vulnerable. One could even say too sensitive for his age and extraordinarily suggestible. Others influenced him, not the other way around. Thus he lived into his not-so-young years, preserving both his vigor of spirit and clarity of mind. Another thing he managed to preserve from his youth, from that age when boys gradually become men, was the corruption of his thoughts and the lustfulness of his gaze, and it was precisely this aspect of his nature that gave rise to this story, and perhaps others to come. Without spending too much time on background and preliminaries, I'll get straight to the point. Philip loved one woman. It seemed to him that the love was mutual. They spent a great deal of time together, both day and night, delighted one another with gifts, and anticipated each other's wishes. Neither was particularly demanding. She wanted attention during the day, and he wanted it at night. That was how they existed together. But Philip, as mentioned above, had one vice. He was prone to falling in love. He fell in love with practically every woman he met. Even if only briefly, he still fell in love with them. And while spending time with his one and only, he somehow managed to think about others. Sometimes he even spoke about it aloud. To go on the offensive, so to speak, abandon his beloved and plunge into wild living was something he never dared to do. He feared losing what he already had. He was like a mushroom picker who rejoices over one prized porcini mushroom rather than 3 dozen other mushrooms whose names he doesn't know, and so he classified them all as fly agarics. The same with women. He loved them, but with a special kind of love, a distinctly Philip kind of love. One day he became the victim of such a young woman. While riding on a bus, he caught sight, out of the corner of his eye, of a lady who instantly captured his heart, much as young women captivated Pushkin in the 19th century. Only he could not express his admiration in verse. Instead, he simply stared at her and drilled into her with his gaze. The lady noticed. Most women in her place would have become embarrassed. But she was not timid. If a man looked at her for more than 5 seconds, then, in her view, the man had intentions, serious or not. Therefore, she believed it was her duty to turn a pretext, namely herself, into an excuse for conversation, and conversation into action, and action into results. She was not shy and lived by that formula herself. So when Philip finally looked away after 8 seconds, deciding that she'd had enough, she wasted no time and approached him herself. She held out her hand, introduced herself, asked what he did for a living, and suggested they have coffee together. Philip, as I already mentioned, was not one to turn visual fascination into physical action. In fact, he was embarrassed by the very idea. As the lady asked him all these questions, he merely gazed at her with love-struck eyes and mumbled incoherently in response. After her invitation for coffee, which had been prompted solely by his stare, he hurriedly got off the bus, despite still being a good 3 kilometers from his destination. The bus carried on with the lady aboard, while Philip, having recovered from such excitement, walked the rest of the route on foot, fantasizing about what he would have done with her. Sometimes fantasies bring more joy than reality. The next time Philip displayed the promiscuity of his gaze, or rather his single gaze, was when he went to the cinema with his one true love. While his beloved visited the ladies' room, he went to buy tickets, and fate made him choose the 4th ticket booth. When his turn came, behind the register stood a girl of unprecedented beauty, according to Philip. He fell in love instantly. His gaze and his smile, overflowing with affection, remained fixed upon the cashier's face. His ears did not hear her questions. He simply consumed her with his eyes. She, probably long accustomed to such attention, God alone knows how many people pass before a cinema cashier in a year, paid little attention to the intensity of his stare and merely continued asking questions. Finally, hearing her voice, he returned to his mortal body and stated his wish to purchase 2 tickets for the showing. Having issued the tickets and received his money, she simply said, "Next!" Philip returned to his beloved, still staring wide-eyed at the cashier. He never really saw the movie. Even while looking at the large screen, he kept seeing her again and again, the cashier. Knowing she was just outside the theatre doors, he repeatedly asked his beloved for permission to go to the restroom. He would then slip out into the lobby and, hiding behind a pillar, watch her, the cashier. There were exactly 6 such trips during the 90-minute film. This led his beloved to suspect that the problem might lie with his prostate. She insisted on making an appointment with a urologist for him, which she promptly did herself. Since she had arranged it, and since he had no wish to upset her, and knowing there would be full oversight, and that if he skipped the appointment he would fall into disgrace in her eyes, and she, let us remember, was the prized porcini mushroom, and he had no desire to gather other mushrooms, he went. Few people have heard of a urologist being a woman. Everyone is accustomed to seeing, in the chair of that particular doctor, a strong-willed man capable of determining the past, present, and future of the object being examined from appearance alone. And I am not referring to the face. But Philip was unlucky, or perhaps very lucky. His urologist turned out to be a woman, with whom, as you may have guessed, he immediately fell in love. While she interviewed him and filled out paperwork, he stared at her with eyes full of desire and eagerly answered all her questions. It felt as though he were living in some fairy tale. One thought circled endlessly in his head. "My God, she's beautiful." The thought slowly dulled the moment the female doctor put on a disposable glove and asked him to remove his underwear. Philip instantly wiped the smile from his face, abandoned his lustful gaze, and turned bright red. He had completely forgotten what awaited him. Again he began mumbling incoherently that none of this was necessary, that there had been a mistake, and that his beloved had simply jumped to conclusions. Then, out of embarrassment, he ran from the office. He was hot. Sweat poured from him. But the doctor remained in his thoughts. "My God, she's beautiful." For a moment, the image of his beloved flashed before him, and he realized he was making a terrible mistake by betraying his treasured porcini mushroom in such a way. Pulling himself together, Philip returned to the office. Without saying a word, he exhaled, closed his eyes, and lowered his underwear. He waited. The time seemed eternal, as he anticipated the doctor putting on another glove, approaching him, and taking hold of his penis. I fear that is exactly what medical textbooks call the organ, and therefore no artistic substitute could be found. All kinds of thoughts raced through Philip's head, from forgiveness to farewell. Finally, she touched him. He gasped. He felt her hand uncover the head and turn the organ slightly as she examined it for spots. "Excellent," she said. Philip's spirits lifted, though he still dared not open his eyes. He feared that if he looked at her, all his feelings and thoughts about her would immediately reveal themselves in her hand. He feared that greatly. But after her compliment, he regained some confidence. She informed him there were no problems with his penis and asked him to lean against the examination couch and bend over. She herself went to apply gel to her finger. Philip broke into a sweat instantly. With difficulty moving his legs, he made his way to the couch and did exactly as she instructed. Her finger breached the defenses. At that point, Philip could no longer keep his eyes closed. He was astonished, outraged, tense, conquered, and flattered. How all those emotions coexisted within him, even he did not know. He glanced back over his shoulder at her. In that moment, by which I mean in that position, with the finger examining his prostate, she seemed to him like a goddess. He instantly forgot about his porcini mushroom and told himself that sometimes one is tempted even by cheap fast food. All manner of thoughts swirled through his head, and every one of them concerned the doctor. Her finger left him. "Excellent," she repeated. "Excellent," Philip replied, staring at her and smiling. "What a beautiful voice you have," he continued, completely forgetting that he was nearly naked. She told him to get dressed. She then summarized that everything was fine, and that the visit had been more preventive than diagnostic, disproving the concerns of his beloved. She invited him to return in 6 months for another routine examination. He could not take his eyes off her, and insisted that such preventive care was far too infrequent. He demanded appointments once a week. Then he claimed he often felt cold, to which she suggested doing it less often. In short, he did not want to leave, and she no longer knew how to get rid of him. Eventually, Philip stepped outside and remained standing beneath her windows until evening. His beloved called him herself and happily celebrated the news that everything was perfectly fine. It was the first time in his life that he regretted being perfectly healthy. He wished there was something wrong with him in that department, something very wrong. Then he might have become a long-term patient of that doctor whose name he had already forgotten. But that didn't matter. He was in love up to exactly the level to which she had inserted her hand. Philip left, but like a determined robotic assassin, he promised he would return. He suddenly wanted mushrooms. On the way home, he stopped at a shop and bought mushrooms he had never purchased before. He decided that if the time had come to change mushroom clearings, then he ought to find out what grew in another one. What if it all turned out to be different after all?